I'm not a tech expert, I'm not, but I've spent my whole life managing risk. All these folks in AI are telling us we're creating something that's really dangerous. It's going to be really great too, but we're helpless to do anything about it. And yet we're doing nothing right now.
There's huge commercial pressure to build AIs with greater and greater agency to replace human labor. But we're not ready. We still don't have the scientific answers nor the societal guardrails. We're playing with fire.
We're dealing with something we've got no experience of. But I think once people understand that this is coming, there will be a lot of pressure to put serious effort into it. If we just carry on like now, just trying to make profits, it's going to happen. They're going to take over.
It's hard for me to say what self-aware means. The thing is though, whether it's self-aware or not, again, depending on how we interpret this, one thing is clear, that AI is being trained from human data. And if in that human data, there's examples of how humans bend the rules to evade bad things happening to them, and you tell the AI, hey, I'm gonna do this and unplug you, then yeah, it's quite likely the AI will then, okay, this bad thing happens, and when bad things are happening to anyone, I can bend the rule or I can do this illegal thing to get my way out of it. But if it's been from human data, one thing is clear, that it will emulate human behavior one way or another.
And welcome back to another episode of the 100-Year Podcast. My name is Adario Strange, and this week we have with us Manos Koukoumidis, the CEO of Oumi, and his URL is Oumi.AI. Oumi is, I would say, well, why don't you explain what Oumi is, Manos?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me, Adario. Really great to be here. I'd like to say that, the one way to think about Oumi is think about OpenAI, which is nothing but open. It's completely closed. Oumi is exactly the opposite. It's unconditionally open frontier AI platform and models. So, and perhaps to start a little bit with the motivation, I used to be at Google Cloud. Actually, I bootstrapped the efforts for Palm. That was the model before Gemini, then contributed to Gemini. But I could not imagine a future where the most critical technology, AI, both for the sciences, the industry, for everything, is going to be in a black box. And that's why we started Oumi, to say that to enable actually anybody in the community, any enterprise, any researcher, to easily develop and push the frontier of foundation models. And if you're an enterprise, also be able to more easily leverage the open models to develop the specialized AI that they need for their business. So in a nutshell, Oumi is an open source platform that enables both research and development with foundation models, both to push the state of the art, but also to adapt and customize in specific domains and tasks. And also a very broad community of, we have right now over 20 academics from multiple universities, Princeton, NYU, Stanford, MIT, Berkeley, pretty much any university, you name it. Many people also in the open community that collaborate together to advance frontier AI. Because our strong thesis is that frontier AI is too critical to put in a black box. It should be democratized. It should develop openly and collectively. And the best, again, way to do this is to do it openly. And that's why we're building the platform to make that happen.
Okay, I want to come back to a couple of points you made, but I just first want to kind of root people in the beginning of Oumi. So you guys just came out of stealth. You got like a seed investment of $10 million just in the last couple of months. And as you mentioned, you are a veteran of Google, I believe also Meta. You were a research scholar at MIT. And actually, one of your partners, Princeton, is where you got your PhD in computer science, computer engineering.
Yes. Yeah. I was doing some very early work on what now is called on-device intelligence, edge AI. Yeah.
And explain PaLM, like the acronym PaLM, Google PaLM. You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, so PaLM, if I can recall correctly, stands for Pathways Language Model, is one of the first efforts, even though there was T5, there's quite a few other models in the past, but it was one of the bigger models that Google, Brain, and others started developing. In many ways, you could say the precursor to Gemini.
PaLM 2 is Google's next generation large language model. The model is really different than anything that we've built before. PaLM 2 is very good at math, at code, at advanced reasoning, and then also at multilingual tasks like translation. The way that it was able to accomplish this was because it was trained on scientific and mathematical data.
In many ways, Gemini was a rebranding of PaLM, and then eventually also adding multimodality, and of course, across the time, also improving it. But yeah, it was pretty much the same story. Large transformer model, massively pre-trained. Of course, moving to Gemini, greatly improved in terms of how it's done.
And I also, I always like to get the founder story. You are originally from Greece. Do I have that right?
Exactly. Yes.
And so your initial degree is from Athens, University of Athens. Tell, like, kind of paint the picture of how you got from Greece to the U.S. And I mean, you're not in Silicon Valley, but I guess Silicon Valley 2.0 in that you're in Seattle, so it's kind of like the sister tech hub of the U.S.
Yeah. I would say that not everything was extremely well planned, or at least not in advance. So my father used to be an electrician, and I wanted to become like him. And the best school in Greece was it was the Electrical and Computer Engineering School of the National Technical University of Athens. So it was doing both electrical engineering and computer engineering. So I got into computer engineering, you could say, almost by accident. And even from the first semester, I really liked we're doing programming in Pascal, the second semester in C, and I really liked it to the point that from all the following years, I was a teaching assistant teaching the first year students how to code. Yeah, it was clear that I want to be in software development, software engineering. And then when I was applying to do my PhD, my goal was originally, I'll be candid, I applied to do it for a PhD without clearly knowing what a PhD is. So, okay, that sounds interesting. You can go to the US, you can get a degree. It's all sponsored, which for a average Greek family, it's prohibitive if you have to pay those tuitions. Whereas if you get a stipend with a PhD, then it's very, very manageable, I would say. Not just manageable, self-sufficient. So that's how I got into doing a PhD, even though I didn't very well understand what it is when I was applying. But that's going to be a good experience. Go to the US, a great school, get the master's. If I like it, I can continue, get the PhD, which I ended up doing. And while my plan was originally to do research on what's called sensor networks or IoT, um, then it was actually when the first iPhone was coming out. And I remember telling my advisors, I don't want to work on little tiny sensors and doing things on them. I think one day everyone's going to have a device like this. So I want to do something with smartphones. And because of all the sensors, all the data, I won't say by accident, but I started realizing that, you need some good ways to be able to do something useful with the data. And that's how from those early PhD years, I got, I would say, very enamored with AI. And that's all I was doing since then, starting from more sensory data and then moving to natural language, which is arguably the thing I've been doing the most the last, I don't know, 15 years.
Okay, so but let's stay back in your home country for a second. You know, I'm always looking at our previous guest was from Switzerland. We love having international guests on. So I'm always curious as kind of like what the tech culture is in various regions. And I just thinking about you, I remember I know Mira Murati, the former CTO of OpenAI, is from Albania. And I know Albania
Mhm.
and Greece are very different, but they're
Yes.
effectively in the same region. It's almost like New York, New Jersey in terms of proximity. Is there
Yeah.
any kind of like tech culture happening in that? Would you call that Eastern Europe? Do I have that right?
You could say that, even though I would argue that, I mean, it's nowhere close to what is in the Bay Area or New York or, Seattle. Uh, there's quite some notable people that are trying to grow the startup ecosystem in Greece. But yeah, it's unfortunately nowhere close to what you find here in the major US tech hubs. And that's why also when we started with Umi, or many years before I started Umi, I was always thinking that, what, if I create a startup, one day I would like to have also an office in Greece
Hmm.
because there's exceptional talent there. And I would like to be able to give more people there the opportunity. So actually it's a win-win. It would be a win for Umi, also be, I think, a win also for Greece as well. And actually, that's also why we're actively looking into this right now. There's a couple of here, quite a few friends or people that may be working for companies in the US, but yeah, overall the startup ecosystem, and it's very limited, unfortunately.
What does Umi mean, by the way? Does that have any Greek underpinnings?
It doesn't. Um, it stands for Open Universal Machine Intelligence. Actually, interestingly, our previous company name was Learning Machines AI.
Okay.
And somebody recently confused it with Mira Murati's thinking machines. Like, no,
Yeah.
we're not thinking
Thinking.
machines. We used to be learning machines. AI. Actually, I got an invoice yesterday saying thinking machines. I'm like, no, we're not thinking machines. We're not even learning machines AI anymore. But we're looking for a name that is short, easy to pronounce, pass the founder test, as you were saying earlier. But at the same time, it has the meaning we want to convey, which is we don't want to use necessarily the word AI because I think it's just overly used, but say, massive intelligence because that's all it is, and it's open. And universal because that's our goal, to make sure that it becomes universal. It gets democratized access. Anybody can both leverage it, but also contribute to the development of this open massive intelligence. In Japanese, it means see, but yeah, that was partially, you could say, not fully intended. There was even a comment by someone said, "Oh, actually, Umi, it's also a part of your last." And I'm like, no, that's definitely not intentional.
I was wondering that too. The Japanese part is interesting. I hadn't thought about that. And yeah, and speaking about, and this is kind of maybe a marketing turn for a second, it also passes the test of the 2-syllable company name. And it also makes me think of Linux. So Linux, Umi, is very easy to say, very easy to remember.
Yeah.
Talk to me about kind of, I guess, for those who don't know, Linux, very old open source operating system, originally developed by, I think, Finnish Linus Torvalds many years ago. I used to use Linux 100 years ago. I don't touch it anymore, but I think it's still embedded in many systems and servers, and a lot of developmental work still happens on Linux. It really supercharged the tech space for decades. Thank you, Linus. What would you say kind of are any similarities or differences between what you're trying to do in open source AI versus what Linux did in just general operating systems?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Quite often, when we talk about Umi, we say that our goal is to build the equivalent of Linux for AI. Because when I was inside Google and I was talking to many academics, many of them of which we already collaborate, and then after I left Google, talking to many other enterprises, the thing that I was realizing was that across both groups, academia and enterprise, they were struggling to work with open models. Companies like Meta, DeepSeek, Qwen, Alibaba, they would provide these open models, these open weights. But then when it comes to having the platform that helps them play with those models to customize them, evaluate them, or use them for all the many useful tasks like curating data, which is also part of the usually model development process, it was extremely hard. Also, many academics, they would tell me that, what, we used to do, top researchers in the field, that doing this type of AI research is not as easy for us as it used to be a couple of years ago. And I was realizing that there was this gap, right, that the community was lacking a platform, an open platform, makes it easy for them to do this research and development with foundation models. I tell people, it's almost equivalent to Linux, because when you think of Linux, it's not, you don't have to go get the device drivers from one location, the scheduler or the memory management subsystem or the Windows subsystem, and put them together yourself. Somebody like Linus put this all together into something that's easy for everybody else to use. And that's why the whole community gathered. They started using Linux, even though it was not as good as Unix, arguably. But because it was open, it was transparent, people used it. They say, you know what, it's almost as good, but it's open, flexible, I can customize to my needs. And also, have all the full flexibility, lower costs. And that's why, Linux end up by far dominating compared to Unix. And as you were saying earlier, pretty much for the most part, now the world works on Linux. Linux runs, all the internet runs on Linux. Most of the cloud services, for the vast majority, run on Linux. AI itself is being built primarily on Linux, on some version of Linux. And that's why I want to do the same thing for AI, because we said, you know what, the access to the development and usage of AI needs to be democratized. It should not be a black box that you have to only access behind an API, where, what I did with Google with Gemini, or what OpenAI or Anthropic does. And, to make this happen, we need to give people the full Linux of AI, the full platform that helps them do this type of work. That's what it's necessary to democratize access. So yeah, that's I guess one way to think about it. And that's why we refer to this as building the equivalent of Linux for AI.
And a lot of people talk about open source platforms, but they often don't talk about kind of, I guess, the meat and potatoes of it, which is the community. If you don't have a community, if you're unable to foster a community around your open source tools, it's hard. And this makes me think about kind of the fun of Linux. I could be wrong, but I believe the mascot was a penguin,
Yes,
if
yes,
I have it right.
yes.
Is there anything similar? Do you have it like what's the fun part of Umi? I know you're very early on, and I know you need to pay attention to the serious stuff right now. But in terms of marketing and fostering a community and kind of making it seem fun, is there any kind of like, what are the fun parts that people who are kind of maybe uninterested until they know more? Some things, some little candy that might draw them in, like mascots, that kind of thing. I don't know.
Yeah,
Events.
yeah.
Are you guys doing events?
Yeah, actually, very, very relevant comment. I've been thinking recently that, should we have a mascot and what should that be? I'd say the most somewhat similar kind of relevant thing is quite often when I give presentations, I like showing people uh, you may have seen like this diagram where it shows a big fish going and scaring a little fish, but then when many little fish gather and they form a big fish, then they can defend themselves and scare off the big ugly
Mm,
shark. I usually use that in a picture where I say Closers.ai or maybe specifically name specific companies and put them on the shark. And that's so
mm,
that coalition, this collaboration of small fish as open source AI. Because
mm,
that's actually what I think the open community can do with AI. Actually, I would say even more than they did with operating systems, even more than they did with databases. If they work together, the open community can not just defend themselves against closed source AI, but they can be the ones that define the future of AI. But anyway, that's usually a graphic I often use. We don't have a mascot, but arguably maybe we should come up with one. I'll definitely take that feedback and think about it. I'm very excited we're going to have soon our first developer relationship community manager joining us just in about 2 weeks. So we're going to be doing a lot more of that. Until then, we have been giving a fair amount of presentations. We've got quite a bit of inbound from different universities or national labs in the US saying, hey, we hear about what you guys are doing. It would be great if you come and talk more about what Umi does. And actually, we've got very positive feedback because what we heard quite often was that even from the biggest national labs that, hey, we can't compete with OpenAI, we can't compete with Anthropic. What's our role? What should we do? I was like, hey, here's how we can all work together as a community and make this happen. And I could say, it gives them back some hope that, okay, now there can be a better future with the open community contributing.
You mentioned one of your academic partners is Stanford. In a previous episode of the 100-Year Podcast, we had one of the directors of the Stanford AI safety team.
The mission of the center itself is more about the technical development than the regulatory or policy front. We are really concerned with how, at least the work that I'm doing, that I've worked with other professors on, is about how we can build techniques to provide safety guarantees. And we have corporate sponsors and affiliates that see the value in that work and partner with us to develop new verification methods for their tools and systems. You don't want to be a self-driving car company that has accidents, because that would inhibit your ability to deploy your system to be commercially successful, to serve people. So even though there is the possibility for overregulation, I think that is a challenge that we see, and there's the possibility for knee-jerk reactions of governments that regulate the training or the technology. You can't necessarily regulate statistics, math, and linear algebra, matrix multiplication. You can regulate applications, though, and so that I think is potentially a valuable path to go down. But for Silicon Valley and for the techniques that we build in the center, I see a really great potential for partnerships there, where it's possible to how everyone can win. We can start to provide techniques, tools to build the public's confidence in these types of AI-based systems, where there is skepticism, there is doubt about, are they safe? What's the behaviors? What are the properties? Well, we don't have as many tools as we would like, and so that's what the center is working on, building tools so that everyone can be more confident in AI-based systems. We can make statements, we can make properties, we can make guarantees about how they behave, and so they become safer for everyone, and we can solve new problems with AI-based systems. For all of the challenges they presented, they've also presented amazing solutions.
He talked about their efforts. I'm just curious, are you aware of what they're doing over there, at Stanford in terms of AI safety? And what role does just the general notion of AI safety writ large play in what you're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm reasonably well familiar with their efforts, also with many other institutions that are trying to push forward for a more safe AI. I think, and actually not only aware about say, and something that I would say extremely supportive, because if one thing is clear is that the OpenAIs of the world, they're not investing enough in safety. Unfortunately, those companies, they are racing to one-up each other in these leaderboards or these benchmarks, so they can say, hey, we're better than the other company, and make more progress perhaps on the scenarios that are more commercial, because they say, you know what, if we manage to solve this commercial problem, then we can win this big reward, we can be the ones who dominate in AI. Because they think there's going to be a huge monetary reward, which I think it's very reasonable to think about this. But because of that, they're cutting corners, and they're not investing enough in safety. And that's why I think, given what's happening and the pace at what AI is improving, it's critical for the open community to do its part, because I think those closed labs, they're not doing it. Now, similarly, also for Umi, that's why our goal was that AI, they can continue to advance. There's been discussion about slowing down AI or not slowing it down. I think the genie side of the bottle, AI is going to be advancing. You can stop it. I think not in a meaningful way that you can coordinate across the whole world that, hey, these state nations don't continue the advancement and everybody stops. It won't, practically won't happen. And it cannot happen. And given that, the best way to ensure and safeguard our future is that we invest enough in safety now before AI becomes even more powerful. And again, given that the closed labs are not doing that, I think that's why it's even more important for the open community to do this. That's also the reason why we as Umi want to enable the community to do this research and development with foundation models. They can advance both the foundation models, but also be better able to understand them in terms of the safety, biases, and all of these problems that they have.
So talk to me about, I guess I won't say similar efforts, but when people think about open source AI, at least right now, the things that come to mind are Meta's Llama and DeepSeek from China. So I want to kind of section those off into two discussions. I don't want to lump them in. So first, talk to me about Llama and kind of what you think they're doing. I mean, I'll just tell you the chatter I hear is that, some people think because of Meta / Facebook's history of, I guess, data handling and control of users and that kind of thing. Cynical people look at Llama to some degree as basically just a control play, trying to kind of get in before a quote unquote real open source effort happens, and it essentially kind of like seed the open source ground first. I mean, what would you say to that? Is that cynical? Is that somewhere in the range of reality?
I mean, there could be some truth to it, but all I would say for now is I'm really grateful that efforts on Llama, Coin from Alibaba, DeepSeek exist, because the alternative would be that all of us use the black box from OpenAI, Anthropic, or Google with Gemini, and that's a far worse future for all of us. You can have all sciences enterprise relying on a black box behind an API. It's extremely limiting. It's extremely limiting for scientists. They need open and constrained access to be able to play with this technology adjusted to their domain, science, and needs. And it's even the same thing for enterprises. Quite often, I've heard quite a few of these big players saying, oh, just play with the prompt, just do this, just use our model, that's all you need, which is not true. I mean, for enterprise to be able to differentiate, they need to be able to flex their AI muscles. And you can't do that by using a black box behind a very, very limited API. So anyway, that's why I'm really grateful that these open models exist. Because yeah, the alternative is just far, far worse. I do think that an even better outcome, an even better future for all of us, as you said, it's like a fully open source, which is what we're trying gradually to enable with Umi, which is that all the open community can contribute to the development of this AI. And it's not just that Meta or Quen, Alibaba with Quen or DeepSeek develop those models and then they give it to you. They don't tell you how they did it, but it's okay, here's an open model, here's the weights. But instead, the whole development of the foundation model becomes democratized and transparent. So that's the future we want to push forward, because I think it's going to be critical for all of us.
Okay, and so we don't generally on this pod delve too deeply into politics, but we do talk international policy. And so my first question, I have a precursor to my actual question. My first question is, are you like, is your company an American company? Are you incorporated as an American company?
Yes, we are an American company.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So recently, Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Meta, wrote about open source AI, and he actually mentioned DeepSeek. And I won't get into some of the political things that he said, but essentially, he and others have indicated that open source efforts like DeepSeek may present some sort of security issue. Um, Now, I've thought about this in general, away from any particular nation. I've thought about just the open source community. Uh, like, for instance, the way I got into AI myself a few years ago is through AI tools like Stable Diffusion. Um, and now you see reports of people maliciously releasing really good models that you can use via Stable Diffusion, but there are malicious actions or code in the models that could compromise your system and your life. So I'm curious, like, from the national security perspective, what do you say to get, like, how do we keep politics out of open source AI? How should we view something like DeepSeek? Should the involvement or potential involvement of that government keep us out of that, or what do you think?
Yeah. So at least specifically for DeepSeek, there's two concerns that I've seen being raised, and I think they're very valid. The first one was that if you use a DeepSeek model that is hosted by DeepSeek itself or some other company in China, there's a chance that your data one day could be, shared perhaps with a CCP or some other Chinese entity. I think that could be a reasonable concern, and that's why I think many concerns were raised that, hey, don't use DeepSeek. But usually what they meant is don't use DeepSeek that is hosted in China, because if you get DeepSeek but it's hosted by some other provider like Lambda, Together.ai, and so on, then I think it's far better. The issues, though, even with that version, sometimes that you may see is that because of the biases in how the model was trained. As you said, it could be malicious, it could be just biases. So, for example, when you ask it specific questions, it has to align with the party line of the CCP, and that could mislead people. So that's actually definitely a concern that is very valid. At the same time, though, that's why I think truly open source models are even more important, where it's not just the weights of the model, but the whole pipeline from the data to the code that you use to develop it is transparent. Because then you can know if intentionally any biases were injected or not. And also, I was talking to somebody recently from that's affiliated in some ways with national security agencies. I was telling me, what? Yeah, open source AI is what any of these agencies need, because you need to be able to know exactly how the sausage was made. You can trust the weights of a model because it's hard by looking just at the weights to figure out if that thing was built in a way to do something malicious, as you said. It's very hard. It's actually really almost impossible, I would say. Anyway, that's why. But if you have access to the data, the code, everything, and you know what, here's exactly how this was made, you can reason about its behavior, and you can decide whether you can trust it or not trust it.
What when you think about, I guess, DeepSeek and other so-called open source models, AI models, like, what is the well, first of all, are there any alternatives to DeepSeek that you're aware of? I mean, in terms of, like, internationally, that are doing something interesting. And I guess number two, what are the kind of, as an end user myself, like, what can I do to ensure that, like, for instance, I'll tell you just, and you can tell me if I kind of did this incorrectly. When DeepSeek came out, I basically used a burner phone, and I got, the direct from the, source DeepSeek, but then I also got one of my lesser used machines, and I used the DeepSeek version from Perplexity. And I tried both, got similar results. So I removed the direct version from my burner phone, and I just kept using the Perplexity version, kind of test it out. Um, I'm not a computer scientist, so I do what I can to protect myself. So I mean, are there any kind of alternative, I guess, international open source models that are interesting and powerful like DeepSeek that you know of? And what can end users do to kind of, like, I guess, protect themselves in some way?
unfortunately, while there are some efforts in some companies in Europe, like for example Mistral, the dominant and most powerful models right now are Llama, DeepSeek, and Quen. And actually, until Llama 4 came out, what we were seeing also from the usage of Umi was that, yeah, most people were starting to use DeepSeek or Quen, not Llama. Now with Llama 4, things may change a little bit because, yeah, for some time, they were dominating quite a bit in terms of quality. But yeah, not any other European model. So unfortunately, that's where things are. It's between Llama, DeepSeek, and Quen. That's the main ones. There's some other open models like Gemma from Google or Phi. Some other also smaller efforts from nonprofits. But yeah, I would say it's these three that are by far getting most of the usage. And, for a good reason, for quality reasons. Now, in terms of protecting yourself, I would say, my main concern, for some of the models that are at least being developed in the US and be developed in China, perhaps one thing to be perhaps on the lookout was for potential biases. There are solutions out there, arguably, actually, things that we are already starting to develop for what we call reliability. For example, things you can add to any open or closed model to make sure, as you said, to some extent, you're safe, meaning it's not hallucinating and misleading you, or it's not saying something that is unsafe. These are some capabilities actually we're currently building. But yeah, I would say for now, it's definitely not a solved problem. And I can't think of something that you can just go, you solve the self, and you say, yeah, I can feel safe now.
So one thing that I researched, maybe, I don't know, sometime last year was you talk about kind of bias. I researched the repository database called Lion that came out of Europe that was used, I think, to some degree in Stable Diffusion and other projects. And there was some controversy over potentially inappropriate images being included in the database. And this is kind of this makes me think back to my early time, using Stable Diffusion and bias and, I guess, kind of influence from bad actors. This also makes me think of a recent story. You may not be aware of this, but on Twitter, or sorry, X.com, where they have deployed a Grok AI chatbot. Apparently, according to Grok and XAI, some rogue person, they don't specify engineer or not, some rogue person injected political speech into the responses for, general queries. So I'm curious, like, even in, if we're talking about a closed model, like let's say a Grok or whatever, Perplexity, whatever, that can kind of they can be held accountable. Someone can kind of circle back and say, what happened here? How does that happen? Particularly, I mean, I know in the Linux community, basically it was kind of like self-policing, and people were punished, for, becoming bad actors. I mean, we're in such an early stage, and everyone, not everyone, but so many people are opportunists, and everyone sees this big bag of money around AI. Like, how can we address this at this point? Not necessarily through what you're doing with Umi, but in general, like how can that be handled?
Yeah. So if I were to hypothesize, I would think that some of the engineers, because that's a closed model, some of the engineers inside Grok, perhaps during the post-training phase of the model, they managed to align the model to respond in specific, biased ways. But I would be surprised, I guess, depending also on how XAI operates internally, if a single person unilaterally can introduce such a change. So I would like to think that normally will have to be some form of pull request, code review, some change that needs to be reviewed by at least one more person in the team. And that's also the same way you can do the open community. It's can be based on reputation. You can make sure only the right people can push the final buttons that train the big model, that incorporates all these changes. There's people who reviews the changes that happen. So that's ways in which you can mitigate to a great extent those issues. At the same time, I would say the benefit with open source is, it was actually to a quote from Linus, that is, Linus would say that given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. Which actually it's a very well justified code because Linux, it's a much safer operating system. It has been much more safer and stable than the closed alternatives. And I would say the same thing, often paraphrase what Linus said for AI and say, given enough eyeballs, all AI issues are shallow. Meaning that such an issue, if it was in open source, it's likely that somebody, because of all these eyeballs, would have noticed before it becomes an actual problem in production, before somebody hopefully reports in production. Because the whole thing was transparent about how it was built, and maybe somebody could go find it. And maybe there's other issues, maybe more subtle biases that, right now, if no XAI engineers finds it and no consumer reports it, it may be very hard for other people to, figure out, let alone resolve. Whereas again, if it's fully open source, it's much more likely that somebody in the community may spot this and say, hey, there's something that we should be improving.
You, from what I understand, set this company up as a public benefit corporation. Do I have that right? So my understanding is that OpenAI was originally started in the same fashion. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I think I have it right. And they've been making efforts to go fully commercial. They already are engaged in commercial efforts. And to some degree, I think this is what Elon Musk has been disturbed about, or at least apparently, according to him, this is what he's been disturbed about. I'm not so sure about that. That the effort was originally funded and started to be, not for profit, and now it's, seems to be primarily for profit focused. Recently, OpenAI has announced that they've pulled back. They will not be attempting to push to become like a full for profit company, and that they will maintain their not for profit status. But the allure is still there. I'm sure that they will, do whatever they can to kind of like fill the coffers and, uh, you know, generate revenue. How is Umi going to what's your solution on your side for generating revenue? Where does the money come from in an open source startup like this?
Yeah. So very happy to talk about this because it's definitely a subtle or something very, very important to clarify. So first of all, Umi it's a BBC, as you mentioned. It's a public benefit corporation. It's still a for-profit, whereas OpenAI was created as a non-profit. Public benefit corporation is still for-profit, but they put it in their incorporation, their strong statement about how they plan to advance the public good. That's something that we have already also done. You have to give a report every 2 years, and also something that we plan to materialize also in more ways in the future. At some point, I can talk more about this. But yeah, OpenAI started as a non-profit. They want to switch to for-profit. One thing that I can see actually some Altman's, points, and also that's the reason why we are a PBC, which is still a for-profit, is that I do think that for these efforts to become successful and have the impact in the world, they may need some decent amount of funding. And besides the academic research, you also need to be enabling also enterprises. And I would think that enterprise would be much more happy to rely on an actual for-profit, a company that's aligned with helping them and supporting them, as opposed to a non-profit that may say, no, I don't worry about enterprises. I'm just here on my social benefit cause, and that's all I do. So I think in some ways it's good to have it be a for-profit, and that's why we also made Umi to be a for-profit. Now, while Umi is a for-profit, our plan for our financials and our strategy was very, very different from everybody else. From the early days, I would tell my investors, over a year ago that, hey, we're not going to be like OpenAI, Anthropic, Cohere, or any of these companies that are burning huge amounts of cash, like billions. Now we target, who knows, hundreds of billions, developing these open models. Because, again, if I was a shareholder of these companies, I would be very concerned about what they're doing. In contrast to what OpenAI, Cohere, Anthropic, and all of us are doing, our thesis was that the best way to develop AI faster, safer, and most cost efficiently is to do it on open source. The future of AI will be open source, right? That's the strategy we want to be building on. It's a safer, faster way, the most cost efficient way to develop AI. History has taught us this with many other complex technologies, again, like operating system we discussed before, databases. I think it's even more true and profoundly for AI because of the nature of AI and how it can be advanced across an open community. So given that, we want to enable the community to collectively develop AI, which means that we don't want to incur the bills to train these big foundation models on our own, because we don't want this to be our IP. Instead, we say, the general foundation models and platforms should be a general utility for all of us, which means that collectively, all these organizations that want AI to advance could be footing the bill together to train this, actually both the compute bill and the human resources contributions to develop AI. And that's how you end up with many, much different economics than OpenAI, Anthropic, and all these companies that try to do everything in a silo by themselves by footing the full compute bill and human resources to make this happen.
So when I've had other startup leaders on the pod and just people who advocate for open source, the first thing I always bring up is protecting or building some sort of moat to your business, figuring out how you generate revenue. And the only thing I can ever come up with is support, meaning maybe you don't have rigidly protected IP, but you do have very distinct and protectable methods of support. Is that part of where your business is going?
That is one way in which we could have revenue at Oumi. And sorry, to also answer your previous question, I realized I didn't fully answer this. Definitely not our preferred way, but also to connect those with the previous one. Our thesis is that the general foundation models and platforms should be a utility, right? Should be democratized to help the sciences and every single enterprise, including Oumi, to build upon this open source foundation, their enterprise offerings. If you want, if you will, to build the Red Hat of AI on top of the Linux of AI. But that's why we want to help make sure that the Linux of AI is strong across the community. And then we also going to be, very selflessly in the best position to develop a product that will compete with OpenAI, Anthropic, and everybody else. Only then can we build the best Red Hat. Or somebody else can do, because there's multiple versions of, commercial versions of Linux. They can build it as well. So that's why I think what we're doing, it helps enable many other Davids, like little startups like us, to compete against the Goliaths. Besides, the services are main ways that we're going to also develop our own IP, our own Red Hat on top of the Linux. Our own specialized products that are less for the community, but are more just for the enterprises, that then those we can monetize as IP.
I'm aware of Red Hat, have been for a long time, but there are many people who have maybe very little awareness of the open source community with regard to Linux. Can you just briefly explain to people what Red Hat is?
Yeah, I think perhaps one way to think about Red Hat is as a enterprise version of Linux with extra support and features that help enterprises. Also comes with the support if you need it when you use their software. And you could imagine the same thing also for Oumi, for the Linux of AI, where anything that the open community needs to make it the best Linux, the researchers, we want to make it fully open. But if you're an enterprise, okay, how can I now put this Linux reliably in production for my large enterprise and organize access and experiments across different engineers in my company? These are the things that could become enterprise offerings. Because also these are the things that arguably they wouldn't help as much the researchers or the ML engineers, in the academics and in academia to help advance the open research. So that's kind of roughly where we hope to draw the line. Yeah.
I briefly want to go back to Europe for a second. By the way, I'm, American education. Is Greece part of the EU?
Yes.
Okay, I thought so. So I'm assuming you're aware of the EU Act or the AI Act in the EU. There are some conversations about how it may or may not stifle innovation in Europe, particularly Western Europe, with regard to AI. Do you agree, disagree? And just it almost seems like in large part, Western Europe is to a large degree on the sidelines in so much of the innovation happening here in the West and I guess Asia. What do you think about the AI Act? What do you think can be done to kind of, I guess, stoke innovation in Western Europe?
So for one, I think you need to have some regulation around AI. What exactly is the right regulation? It's a hard question that I'm not sure if I can quickly answer here. The only thing I would caution, which I think quite a few other people have cautioned recently, many other tech leaders, is that we don't want to stifle AI progress. Um, Definitely a lot of things to consider. But you don't want to stifle AI progress. Definitely not in Europe and not in the US, because then other state nations that don't stifle their progress, they're gonna end up leading, and that I think that's gonna be a very concerning outcome for all of us, for all the democratic
So
nations.
let's kind of we're kind of coming toward the end. Let's begin to wrap up, and I want to ask you about potential problems, kind of as you just referred to. Um, One is, we keep talking about OpenAI, and one of the former leaders at OpenAI left, Ilya Sutskever, left to create Safe Superintelligence, I think the name of the company is. Um, what he does or doesn't do with that company, who knows? But just this idea, this general idea of AI safety, and I want to kind of move beyond kind of the guardrails of disinformation and kind of systems that are kind of go off the rails because of some malicious actor or just some accident, and get into kind of the idea of super intelligence. The AI community seems to fall into two camps: the believers and the non-believers. The people who think that AI is just a tool, and anything that it appears to do is really just a human behind the scenes, training it or making it do this or that. And then there's the other group, which includes Jeffrey Hinton, who famously left Google because of his fears, subsequently won the Nobel Prize. This other camp thinks that there is a chance that AI will somehow become self-aware, or the semblance of self-awareness at some point, and perhaps present danger to humans. Where do you fall along those lines?
I can see both sides of the argument. I do think that AI is only going to become increasingly more capable. And the more capable it becomes, whether it acts on its own intent or whether it's some human behind it, it will definitely be, again, more and more powerful, more and more concerning about what somebody could do with it. But that's why I think as AI is advancing, that's why I think it's very important that we start developing the safe AI or the protector AI, the AI that will help protect ourselves from the bad use of the AI. That's our best chance of us protecting ourselves from misuses of AI. Again, either come from AI itself or from a human pushing a button to initiate something that AI does. And again, that's why I think it's very important that the development of AI is not a black box inside a specific organization. It happens openly, and then the open community can better understand this and develop it safely. So we can develop the AI itself to be safer itself, and develop the AI that will help protect us from the bad use of AI.
Well, I have to push you a bit. I can't let you. Everyone who comes on and gets this question, no one gets off the hook. Everyone has to give some sort of answer. So what I'm looking for is, when people like Hinton speak, and others, not just Hinton, speak about this idea of superintelligence. I mean, are you a believer that there is at some point the possibility that an AI system could truly become self-aware and go its own way and begin to kind of do things that may not necessarily align with human benefit?
Yeah, it's hard for me to say what self-aware means. The thing is, though, whether it's self-aware or not, again, depending on how we interpret this, one thing is clear, that AI is being trained from human data, right? From the human data we have generated over the web and many other places. And if in that human data, there's examples of how humans bend the rules to evade bad things happening to them, and you tell the AI, hey, I'm gonna do this and unplug you, then yeah, it's quite likely the AI will then, okay, this bad thing happens, and when bad things are happening to people, to anyone, I can bend the rule, or I can do this illegal thing to get my way out of this. So I don't think it's unheard of if AI is learning from human data that will mimic. So I'm not sure if I can say it's going to be self-aware or not self-aware, it's going to be conscious or not conscious or things like that. But if it's learning from human data, one thing is clear, that it will emulate human behavior one way or another.
But to the root of the question, do you think it's possible, or do you think this is science fiction that people are engaging in?
It's hard to say, because what I'm struggling is, what people mean by superintelligence, if anything is clear, it's going to become smarter and smarter. It will be able to mimic human behavior and even go beyond that in many ways. So yeah, I think we'll learn to do all of the things that it will look more like human. And then you're going to say, okay, if it looks like a duck and walks like a duck, is it a duck, or is it something super smart that learned to mimic a duck and extremely accurately? So that, yeah.
So the difference as to whether I agree with you. This is what I always say. The difference as to whether it is actually self-aware or if it just appears to be self-aware is almost meaningless. If it,
That's
by and
almost what I would
large,
say. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Because the
when we
outcome is going
reach
to
a
be the same.
point, right? So when we reach a point where it just appears to be self-aware and it is off doing various acts, what where do you stand? I mean, then I mean, I'm sure I have a great big imagination. I read a lot of and watch a lot of science fiction. Um, so even an AI system that thinks it's self-aware, are you concerned about that? Is that something? There's this whole chart that people pass around called probability of doom, the P doom chart. Is where are you kind of low probability, high probability? Where do you stand on that?
I think even it's like a low probability because the outcome would be very bad. We need to do something to protect ourselves against it. And again, whether it's AI doing it because of self-awareness or just mimicking human behavior because that's all being trained to do, it's definitely something we need to be ready to create. As I mentioned before, the AI that will help protect us from the bad AI.
Thank you for that insight. I appreciate it, Manos. Again, remind everyone of your website where people can reach you and kind of like find out what you're doing.
Thank you very much, Adario. We're at Oumi, www.oumi.AI. It was really great to be here, and thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, and you can check out previous episodes of the 100-Year Podcast at hundredyear.com. You can check us out Substack at hundredyear.substack.com. And you can also check us out on Spotify, where we're also uploading video in addition to audio. Again, thank you, Manos, and we will see you guys next time.